morning, everybody. Good morning. It is 10 a.m. Eastern time. We've got lots of people joining. Quickly get settled in. It's so nice to see several of your names. I know you've been here every week. Good morning. We'll take just one more minute. We'll let people get in and then we will get started. Grab your book, grab pencil and paper. Good morning, everybody from Lexington. Welcome, welcome. It is so nice to spend this time together this morning. Welcome to our fourth and final book club session. I can't believe it. It's actually gone by so fast. I feel like so much time and energy went into preparing this, and then it's gone by so fast. So thank you so much for sticking with us and joining us each week. Before we get started, we have lots of great things that are going to happen today. Feel free to put your name and where you're from in the chat. We just love to see where you're from, where you're joining us from. And I want to take a minute just to acknowledge everyone that has worked on this book club with me, especially those who are behind the scenes, because a lot of time and energy from several people has gone into this. So first of all, Mindy McCulley, she's been incredible with all the tech side of things. Doctors Courtney Luking, Emily DeWitt. We have several dietetics and human nutrition students who have contributed to this project. So thank you specifically to Nathan Bandy and Nick Wilkins and all of the students in DHN 313 Community Nutrition. Again, a lot of time, energy, and resources have been put into this. So today we will be finishing up the book, which is going to essentially be the last few chapters through the closing thoughts. And then we are also very fortunate today to have a very special guest joining us, author Helen West, and we will hear from her in a little bit. But we're going to review a bit of the content of the book, and then we will jump into our Q&A with her. So more about that to come. Okay, so we've learned over the past few weeks together that food and nutrition can be deeply personal and cultural and really is connected to who we are. And the last part of this book, and some of the things we will talk about today specifically, really pushes us to think about who we are and what we believe. So we want to be sure that everyone feels safe here. I want to encourage all of us to be respectful so that we also, if we all do that, then we will all feel respected at the same time. And I'm just so glad that you've shown up today, knowing these conversations may be a little tough or tricky, and that you've put yourself in this space to learn together. Like every week, we have someone moderating the chat. So this week we have UK faculty and registered dietitian, Dr. Courtney Luking. She's on the call, and she will help answer any questions or provide resources when she can and when it's appropriate. If you have any questions for our author, which I know we'll get to in a minute, and I'll remind you as well, but we would like for you to submit the questions you have for our Q&A with the author in the Q&A function on Zoom. So there's a button on the bottom of Zoom, Q&A, click that, and you can directly send your questions in. And we will try to get to as many of those as possible. Now we're going to hold off joining Menti for now. So if you're wondering about joining, we're not going to join Menti or use Mentimeter until the second half of the call. So we're just going to kind of jump in and get started right away. So don't worry, you haven't missed it. We haven't joined yet. And remember, finally, if you have very specific nutrition questions related to a health condition, we highly encourage you to work with medical providers and a registered dietitian, if possible, so that you can get the care and meet your unique individual needs, right? We are really going to be looking at nutrition from a general perspective. But if you have a really specific question, please try to build around you a healthcare team that can help address those issues. Okay, so we are getting started. I know the attendees are still going up. We have people that are in the chat that are sharing where they're from. So before we dive into chapter 12, I want to first acknowledge that these chapters may take time to process. So you may have read it and you're like, whoa, I need to take this slow. Maybe I need to come back to this. This is something that I'd like to come back and reread, because they really challenge deeply rooted beliefs and they do touch on sensitive topics. It may be triggering for you, from your past experiences, something that's traumatic for you, or if you struggle with poor body image or eating disorders or disordered eating, we recognize that. And I actually hope that some of the content in this last part of the book answered questions for you or helped you realign your thinking and gave you an opportunity to give yourself grace when it comes to health and nutrition, right? We've used the word nuance a lot over the past few weeks. So like finding the nuance when it comes to food nutrition. So this chapter was all about diet culture and weight stigma. So let's talk about diet culture. It's going to be fun. It is widespread, and we may not even realize it when we see it because it is so common. Now, some of this touches outside of nutrition a little bit, but nutrition is still incredibly relevant. This is something that is experienced by all people, all genders, all ages, all life stages. We all see and experience diet culture. It's everything almost from teeth whitening to Botox, diets, quick fixes. It's really clever how it is pitched. And those perpetuating diet culture may directly say it isn't a diet. They may call it a lifestyle. They're very creative and crafty in how they sell these ideas. They're essentially promoting this idea of, if you do what I do, then you'll look like me. This is sold by the diet and wellness industry. Just take this supplement I do or do this workout routine that I do, and you'll see the exact same results. And that is simply not true. You and I, me here in Lexington and you in Henry County, we could move our bodies the exact same way. We could eat the exact same thing each day, and our bodies will look very different. That's the truth. Because on page 197, it says, we are not all designed to look the same, right? Because we talked the past few weeks about all of those outside factors that are also influencing our health and our health choices, right? So essentially, diet culture is collectively the idea that you and I aren't good enough, or there's something about us that needs to be fixed. And then we ultimately transfer that idea about our bodies to ourselves and our personal value and ourselves as an individual. And that is something that we can try to push back against because that's simply not true. And it also seems like diet culture is always moving the goalposts, right? So it's like it shifts what the idea of perfection is so that we are constantly striving or being pushed to try to achieve something else. We want to try to push back against that. So these beliefs are what feed this idea of healthism. So this was a term talked about in the book. You may have heard of it before, but it's the idea that poor health is directly caused by our personal failing. And together over the past few weeks, we have learned that that simply is not true. There are so many factors that influence our nutrition, our food, our ability to make other health-related choices. Now, personal choice is important here, but also our personal choices aren't happening in a vacuum, right? They are influenced and pressured by countless factors outside of our control, whether that's where we live, the food available to us, access to healthcare, and so on. So there are two important topics I want to quickly touch on in this chapter. And the first is weight stigma. So diet culture really feeds into weight stigma in our society. The beliefs we have about fatness in large bodies are often subconscious and reinforced kind of by this culture that we live in. So I want you to think for a second. When we say someone looks healthy, what are you using typically to gauge that or to inform that thought? Are you automatically basing that off that person's body size? A lot of people do, and everyone's guilty. Like that is a thing that our culture has kind of perpetuated, right? If you've ever thought that a person should exercise more, simply exercise more, or if you have ever been to visit a healthcare provider and they simply told you, lose weight and your symptoms will go away. Or maybe you or someone you know was hesitant to start walking or being physically active because they were concerned about what people would think about them, seeing them do that practice. These are all examples of weight stigma. So essentially, diet culture pushes us to think that someone living in a larger body is unhealthy, and I'm doing quotes here, and that it is their own fault. It creates a bias that a person is to blame for their own weight. It is also driven by the belief that weight is the best or only indication of someone's health, and that isn't true. please don't forget that just because someone is in a smaller body doesn't mean that they are healthier than others, because they could be truly experiencing disordered eating. They could be presenting an eating disorder. They could be managing a chronic condition that impacts their nutrient absorption. And those are just a few examples. So really, we need to push back on this narrative that body size is the best and only indication of overall health. Now, weight stigma is also a form of discrimination, and that might be hard to hear for some. And we know there is science to show that those living in larger bodies experience negative effects and have greater barriers to overcome. It's directly linked to poor mental health, poor physical health, and there are several examples that are unpacked on page 199. Okay. So this directly kind of ties into the second topic I want to focus on in this chapter, which is, I'm just scraping the surface here when it comes to intuitive eating. We mentioned this term or this phrase last week when we were talking about the balanced eating wheel on page 121. And this may be something you've heard of before, or it's a brand new concept that you were like, wow, as you're reading this, it's like, this is an answered prayer, or this is a breath of fresh air, this idea about how we can approach our bodies in food and nutrition. It's essentially an approach that is the opposite of dieting. Wow. So this topic is discussed on pages 203, 207. The idea of intuitive eating allows you to enjoy your food, respect hunger, fullness, satisfaction, enjoyment, and ultimately appreciate our bodies for what they are. This approach seems more sustainable than dieting. And although we do need more studies in diverse populations, and the book does say that, we do have trends that suggest it could improve health outcomes, body image, and overall quality of life in the long term. Okay. It may feel strange to accept that all foods can fit. This is an example where it may be tough to unlearn something you've heard your entire life. But remember, foods can have purposes outside of their nutrients or what they are specifically made of. And remember, we don't have to view foods as good or bad. We want to try to push back against food rules and inducing shame and guilt, right? Does this sound familiar? So, because essentially we're talking about that balanced eating wheel back on page 121. So I want to encourage you to revisit the 10 principles of an intuitive eating that's found on page 207. Many of them directly relate back to what we talked about with balanced eating, such as enjoyment, satisfaction, respecting your body, free from rules, and recognizing that there really is no perfect diet for every single person, right? There's no perfect diet that we all should adhere to, that we all are our own individual. Now, if you're interested in learning more about this topic, look for the book Intuitive Eating. You may be even able to find it at your local public library, or find a used copy online, or maybe you and someone else on the call are interested. So maybe you could purchase one copy and share just to learn a little bit more. There's also a workbook that goes along with it that could be really helpful. And then there are some individuals who are actually credentialed to teach about intuitive eating as well. And so that may be something you're interested in looking more into in the future. All right. So that chapter, there's a lot to get through. And then chapter 13, I know a lot of you all really like this chapter. So specifically, it was unpacking popular diets and nutrition myths. And I heard from several of you that this was your favorite chapter because it answered so many questions and it gave you information that you could share with family members who have been pushing specific diets or dietary patterns on you or your family. And now you had information you felt comfortable sharing. So essentially, it walked through some common diets that we have seen over the past 5 to 10 years. And we know that these will continue to change, right? Like there'll be new ideas that are pushed or that will try to be sold to us. But it was just a really nice way for us to see, what it is, what are the risks, the benefits, what does the science say, and then the bottom line. I completely agree with the authors when they said, we feel strongly that people can't be empowered to make good decisions about their diet or health when they are basing their decisions on half-truths and misinformation, which sets us up perfectly as we move into the final chapter that was called Exploring Evidence. All right. No, we're not talking about a mystery podcast, evidence and collecting. We are talking about scientific evidence here. So what is evidence? You may hear people say evidence-based or evidence-informed. If you've hung around extension offices much or attended programming, you'll know that all the information that we share and all the programs that we offer are grounded in evidence. Okay. So the book specifically defines evidence on page 232, and it says, evidence is a collection of information we use to decide whether an idea is true or not. Now, that same paragraph goes on to say it encompasses everything from the stories we hear from friends, news we read online, to the robust, controlled scientific experiments that are conducted that have really informed what we know in nutrition science. Now, this book itself is grounded in scientific evidence. Like, I want to point out, you probably thought when you started reading this book was a lot longer than it was, because in the back there are 30 pages that list almost 300 references that are used to inform the information that we've been reading. That is why we chose this book, because we knew it was reliable and we knew it was grounded in the scientific evidence. Now, we have an issue where nutrition information is everywhere. Almost everywhere we turn, right? People are talking about something they saw or read. It's all over the internet and social media. If I just open Instagram, I feel like I have tons of ads that are promoting some product. And it's often talked about by people who don't have credentials to make them an expert, or don't have, the training or the background or education or profession to make them qualified to share what they're sharing. Now, we pair this with the issue that nutrition science is hard to do and it's complicated. So science alone is hard. But when we layer on how complex food is, because remember, it's made up of multiple chemicals and varying quantities of things, and the complexity of being a human being, the nutrition science gets complex really fast. And that can make nutrition science hard as well. So because of this, we have nutrition misinformation that can easily run wild. We know that information about nutrition is often shaped and shared to fit someone else's agenda. And this could be to gain a social media presence or following. It could be to sell a product. And consumers like us are the ones who are suffering, right? Because the facts are often lost among all of the misinformation that is out there, all of the voices and the noise that we're hearing about information. Because those selling these ideas and products are really good at sharing their message. They make it very appealing and they make it seem very legitimate. They are crafty. Okay, it's a science. They're marketing something, right? This is spelled out on page 227. Okay, they may connect the information to nature, right? Like promote how it's natural. They may use authority or a celebrity, right? They may use a thread of science. I like that language they use in the book, a thread of science, to make it seem legitimate. Okay, trying to connect it to something that we know is true, but it's a little too far out from what we know. And these are just a few strategies. Okay, we want to build our own skills so that we can see the facts among the fiction that's out there. When we understand what evidence looks like, it will help us to develop the skills to determine nutrition facts versus fiction. Okay, so I have stay with me, just a couple more slides before we get to talk to Helen here. But I really want to unpack this a little bit more, especially because you joining this book club are connected to Extension, and we are all about having a grounding in the scientific evidence in what we do. So I want to show you what that looks like. So how do we know what is good evidence? How can we determine if what we are seeing is good information? We can actually organize what we learn with science based on how reliable that information is. Meaning, are we likely to get the same findings if we study the same thing again and again? Or if that information that we've learned through science really can hold up over time, is another way to think about it. So on page 231, there's this nice graphic for all of the content that you find essentially on the following pages, and organizes some of the most common study methods that are used in nutrition science. So at the bottom of our pyramid, we have anecdotal evidence. So this is someone sharing their specific experience. Maybe it's a testimony, right? Maybe it's what you hear from someone that you know, sharing about their personal experience. Now, we can respect it, but it is not highly credible, right? Because we know how unique each of our needs are, and that, again, our bodies are very different, our genetics are very different, the influences on us are very different. Next, we have observational studies. These usually take a lot of time and a lot of people. Now, we've seen several examples of this type of study in the book where they have looked at, a dietary pattern over a long period of time, and then they look at health outcomes in those same people. So this doesn't tell us cause and effect, but it can show relationships between behaviors and health. We see a lot of these in nutrition science. And at the top here, we have randomized control trials, or RCTs. Now, these really are the gold standard to help us eliminate doubt, but are very hard to do with nutrition and are very hard to do with humans. But these types of studies can really allow us to answer the cause and effect question that we often have. So overall, as we move up this pyramid, the science becomes more reliable and trustworthy. Okay. One more slide. I'm almost done. All right. So now you're thinking, okay, so every time I see a claim on Instagram about nutrition, I'm supposed to go back and look at the evidence. Now, no, you can't stop every single time you hear something about nutrition and review all of the evidence before you make your choice. We don't have time for that. That takes a lot of time. That takes a lot of energy. We get it, right? We do want you to approach nutrition misinformation open-minded and with skepticism. So that is taken from the book here. So what does that look like for you as a consumer when you are simply just trying to make the best choice for yourself or your family? This is where we can learn how to spot misinformation, how we can look for the signs so you can weed out the fiction so you're left with the facts. Now, there are over 10 red flags to help you identify nutrition nonsense on page 239. And the pages after that are great at walking you through how to evaluate a news article or something you see in the media. And I wish we had time today to do that, but we simply don't. So instead, I want to run through just a handful of these. And then I want you to mark those pages and go back and refresh yourself after this book review is over. So the first one is using sensationalist and fear-promoting language, okay? So these are going to be words like toxic or poisonous. So if someone is trying to get you to act by scaring you or eliciting like a visceral response about food nutrition, look the other direction, okay? You don't have to deal with that. That is not something that you are going to see when we're talking about scientifically grounded information. The next one, does it promote quick fixes and miracle cures? These are not words that science will use. Often these are buzzwords that are used to get attention. So again, that's not something that we have to spend a lot of time looking at because we know that that's not something that's most likely reliable. If they are selling something like supplements or a detox program, they have an ulterior motive, right? They want to make money. Just keep this in mind when you're thinking about how to use your dollars, if that's a smart financial choice for you. They will essentially say or promise whatever they can, and they can be pretty convincing, right? Again, they're crafty. They know how to put that message together. They know what to say. So always be a little skeptical if you see something being sold. And then the last one that I want to specifically point out is if they're focusing on nutrition as the sole cause and cure of disease. That should sound familiar, right? Because we've essentially said this whole time together that that's not the case. Nope. I hope this one stands out to you because we know all of the factors that are at play when it comes to health. It's like when a product promises weight loss, but they never once mention moving your body. That just doesn't seem to make sense, right? Based on what we know. So remember, these are just a few. We are only scratching the surface. I would love for you to mark page 239 and go back and take a look at those after we finish up our book club together. Okay, you all, it is time. It is so exciting. So I know you're ready for me to be done talking, and so we can get to the best part of the day. One of the best parts of all the Big Blue book clubs that we've done over the past couple of years is that we often get to bring in the author to share with us. And so today we are so fortunate to be joined by one of the authors, Helen West. Hi, yeah, she is a registered dietitian with over 12 years of clinical experience in various settings. She's currently working as an advanced specialist eating disorder dietitian in a lead role and pursuing a doctorate degree just for fun, I guess. Just loves a challenge. Also incredibly accomplished when it comes to talking about nutrition with various audiences. Everything from this book, she's been able to write how incredible this book is, even to scientific publications. So she knows how to talk about nutrition in various ways. She's contributed information to the BBC, The Guardian, Huffington Post, just to name a few. So Helen, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Thank you so much for taking time out to join us today. When you are so busy, when you have so many things going on, we have about 30 minutes. And I have a few questions already to get us started. And I've already had a couple questions submitted to me. But I do want to remind everyone, if you are joining us and you have a question for Helen, to use the Q&A feature. I'll be moderating that and I'll be asking Helen the questions. We'll try to get to as many as possible. But to get us started, Helen, I was hoping you could just share a bit about yourself and then how the book came about.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you guys picking our book. Rosie obviously sadly can't be here, but I hope you've enjoyed it, and thank you for choosing it for your book club. Like, we're really honoured that you picked it. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, grand. Okay. So I covered most of it. I'm a dietitian. I've worked in the UK as a dietitian for over 12 years. I've always had quite an interest in what we would probably call in the profession as like popular nutrition and nutrition sort of science and nutrition myths and things like that. But the book came about because myself and my co-author Rosie were going to there was the big trend in the UK at the time for these wellness events, a little bit kind of like, I guess, a bit kind of Goop style sort of events where they had all these authors coming and different people coming to talk about health and wellness. And Rosie and I went to one that was in London that was a free event, and we just realized there was no one there really that talking about nutrition or talking about food that sort of had any training or any understanding about nutrition. And we just thought it was a really big shame that people didn't have access to like good information about food and nutrition in that setting. So it was a bit of a convoluted story. We didn't set out to write a book. We actually set out to create events for the public. So what we did was we set up, the Rooted Project was an events company where we ran events in London sort of every other month. We took different nutrition scientists and experts in certain areas of nutrition, and we would put them in front of the public, so audiences of 200, 300 people, and we would do Q&A panels and presentations and talk about different areas like gut health or skin and nutrition and things like that. And it was just really popular at the time, and we were just approached, I think because we were doing that and speaking a lot at other events, we just got approached and asked if we would sort of compile all the things that we were trying to put across into a book. And that's how it came about. So it was a bit of a project that I wasn't aiming for, but a project that was sort of a happy surprise when it came.
So looking back, is there anything you wish you could change about the book now? With the experiences you've had after writing it and, learning from all of those experiences with those events and working with all those providers, those types of things, is there anything you wish you would change?
I think we had to write really quickly, and we didn't like publishing. It's a bit of a brutal business, so they asked us to do it very fast. So I think there are little bits and things in there that I would change. I think probably the thing that I would like to change is more framing. And I work now a lot with adolescents and young people with restrictive eating disorders. And I would really love to be able to give them this book, but there's a lot of numbers in there and little bits of it that I think would be too difficult for them. So I think that's been a niggle for me. If I had done that bit a little bit differently, I could have had that information without, been so explicit, or I could have framed it a bit differently that it might be a bit more friendly for adolescents with EDs. And I think it's like anything. Like I've spoken to a few people that have published, like you write this book and you put all of yourself into it, and then it's quite a bit of a delay from when you finish writing it to when it gets published. And then obviously it's been a couple of years since we published it. So my thinking and knowledge about some of the areas in the book has really developed as well. So I think, adding a bit of depth to some areas as well. It's not that I disagree with what I've written. It's just that my understanding and learning means that I've grown a little bit as well. So there are some bits in there.
And the science was going to change a little bit too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah,
absolutely. There's some bits that are in there that, like I know a lot, we've developed, particularly on things like fasting and stuff like that. There's been some really interesting and great evidence that's come out in the last sort of even 6 months. So there's little bits of that I would love to update, but yeah.
And I think that's okay. And I think we've mentioned it on one of these calls of like, it's a good thing that we learn more and that science changes, because that's how we move forward, right? And
yeah,
so,
absolutely.
In nutrition, it can seem frustrating because it feels like you're told one thing and then, the next month you're like, oh, that's it, the science is the other way. And so we just have to have a little grace because nutrition science is so hard, right?
Yeah. So hard.
So you had to write quick, but what was the hardest chapter to write?
Oh, that's a tricky question. I think I found, can I have two? Is that cheating?
Yeah, oh, of course. Whatever you want.
I think the two hardest chapters to write, because I think they were probably equally as hard, was the chapter for me was the chapter on carbohydrates and the chapter on fats. They were really, fats probably edges it in terms of like fat, the sort of the hard science around fats and fat metabolism and the way that we process fats and use fats from food is really, really, really complicated. And if you're thinking of things like cholesterol and, it's very, very difficult. And so it really required me to sort of dig back deep into my metabolism knowledge and sort of, so I think the fats chapter was the hardest one to write for me. Definitely.
I got it. I understand it for sure. So just to go off something you said a minute ago, it looks like we had a question that was submitted asking, what would you add about intermittent fasting, or how would you incorporate that into the book again if you thought about it, knowing that really we have had some substantial evidence come out in the past couple of years?
Yeah, and I don't, obviously I haven't deep dived into all of that off my bat. I think there's some really interesting stuff about intermittent fasting and particularly risks and benefits, so risks and benefits of that, and who that might be appropriate for and who it isn't. Probably people that might be a bit risky, eating disorders being one of them, and women have to be cautious about things like iron and things like that as well. But there's been really interesting evidence that's come out about shift work and sort of the body clock and things like that, and sort of meal timings in that respect, and the impact of shift work and chrononutrition really, that's really interesting that I would like to add if I had the time to dig deep and do that.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, the chrononutrition stuff is really interesting.
At different times of the day.
Yeah.
So we've got a few more questions that are coming in here. First of all, if we enjoyed this book, do you have any other book recommendations? And then the second part to that is people are wanting to know, do you have plans for a second book?
I would say I don't know how much of the books that you would be able to get in the US, but one of my favorite books is about food relationships, and it's called Eat Up. And it's written by a journalist called Ruby Tanno, who is a UK journalist and who had an eating disorder in the past. But it's about the joy of eating and the joy of food and the social aspects of food. And it's just a really, really wonderful book. So I think if anybody is interested in food relationships, it's not a hard read, like, or like a read that's very practical, like something like intuitive eating, that's like a 10-step process. It's not about improving food relationships. It's just about thinking about food in a really sort of joyous and social concept. And she's a beautiful writer. So I would definitely recommend Eat Up if you can get hold of it in the US.
And we will, we'll take down that name of that book and we'll be sure that we share that back out with participating in the call as well. Is there a second book?
Maybe. So there may be an updated book, not this year, an updated as butter or carb, and there may be something that might come out my PhD around, which will be a little bit, it's a bit of a different topic, but it would be around sort of food restriction and force feeding, which sounds really a hard thing to say, but it's about eating disorders and force feeding potentially. But yeah, so maybe is the short answer.
Maybe we will keep our fingers crossed then, for sure. And so this next question kind of ties back to something that you said about how you primarily work with adolescents and youth, and this book is kind of heavy on the numbers or maybe difficult. Like, do you see that there would be opportunity for like a youth or adolescent version of this specific book? I was even thinking of like a workbook that could go, right, like something really engaging and interactive.
Yeah, and I think I use this book to develop a group program at the clinic where I work for the young people, and so it is something that we've talked about, maybe making a young person's version, but also maybe just like making an ED friendly version or a workbook, but using it as a psychoeducation group for people that are working through eating disorders. Yeah, I've hopefully got a meeting with it makes me sound a bit, but my book agent next month. So we're going to talk about all these different ideas that we've got that might be good to put forward, but we'll see. It's never certain in this kind of world.
If you need me to put in a word for you about
yes, please,
how great it's been and the experience that we've had, we are happy to do that from over here. So
thank you, Heather. Yeah, I'll be in touch.
We're your biggest fan as you meet with your book agent. This is another question, and I think I already know the answer, but how did you decide on the title of this book?
Oh, we were really stuck around what to call this book, and somebody published a book later in the UK that was called The Science of Nutrition, which is, yeah, we were going to call our book The Science of Nutrition, but it was just a bit, it sounds like a textbook, yeah, we were trying to think of something that was like that we'd heard that people saying, or that sort of spoke to kind of like the light nature of the book, because we didn't want it to be really heavy. We wanted it to be accessible, and so yeah, we were watching Mean Girls, and that came up. And we just went, yeah, that's, people will know what that is,
Yes. So I assumed it was from the movie Mean Girls. I don't know if anybody on the call has seen that movie. It's a few years old now, which makes me feel old. But yes, that's amazing, and I'm so glad that that's where it came from. And I do agree, like it kind of helps break the ice. It's a funny cover, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's brightly colored. I really think that kind of helps too. And even you talk about that in your introduction of like, this isn't a diet book, this isn't a science textbook, right? Like, we are trying to be something different, and I think that did a really great job of that.
Oh, thank you.
So now we have a few questions from participants that are a little bit more like content specific for topics that are in the book. Okay. So this one just came in. There's so much information out there about things like artificial food coloring, corn syrup versus sugar, like these kind of like really specific topics. Where do you get the most reliable information on topics or like things like this, or specifically like how could a consumer potentially find reliable information on this topic?
I think it's really tricky. I don't know what your like public health nutrition sort of dissemination is like in the US. Here we have like the Nutrition Foundation is the place that we would usually go to in the UK, and they do like short evidence reviews, usually with like a little kind of like sort of easy access summary, so you don't have to read through all the kind of the nonsense. So it's sort of, yeah, that's where we would go in the UK. So we have like the NHS website and things like that. So it's usually public health bodies that will be able to give you the overall kind of picture of what the evidence shows for particular things like sugar versus, artificial sweetness versus corn syrup in terms of the hard evidence. And then I guess the question really for me is always like, it's less about is one better than the other is often a really hard question to answer, for everybody, and it's just thinking about like what your preferences are, and I guess the question you just need to ask yourself is like, is it safe? How much of this is in my diet? Is that kind of thing. But from a public health perspective, it's the bodies really that I would go to for evidence reviews.
So here in the States, I know we've got people that are probably wondering, for those who are in the field of nutrition and dietetics, we have the Academy for Nutrition and Dietetics, which really is the primary organization that really does provide just kind of what you said, short blurbs and information that's for the public on some of these topics. We also have the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, who are kind of that public health agency that have a lot of great information. We will certainly, in our follow-up email with all participants, we'll try to list some of these out that are like easy go-tos that we find reliable, that we know are founded in science.
There is a website that might be worth mentioning that I often use for things like supplements and things like that. It's called examine.com. I don't know if you've ever used that one, but it's a really, really good website for sort of any kind of nutritional supplements that are there, and they do really lovely evidence reviews and things, and sort of talk about the evidence for specific conditions and things like that as well, safety and doses as well, which is really useful.
I'm so glad you shared that, because that is a great one. So examine.com, and really it's all things science, right? Like there's a lot that's on for people to explore. So that was a great question. Here was another one. This one was submitted on Facebook. And so I think it stemmed from the conversations of trying to add more plant-based foods into the diet, diversifying like fruits and vegetables we're consuming, those types of things. So this individual shared, and I think they probably make a lot of the food choices in their home. If you were going to introduce 3 new veggies to a family, used to the basics. So it looks like they eat lettuce, corn, beans, black-eyed peas, and carrots. What would you recommend as being the 3 they should try to prioritize to increase nutrition?
I would think about, so if you're trying to introduce them to other people other than yourself, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, I would prioritize the ones that you as a family enjoy. So if there are vegetables that you enjoy, that you have as part of your diet that you'd like to include in your family meals, they would be the ones that I would prioritize introducing. So the ones that come from the meals that you like and the food that you like to cook. I think it's just about diversity. I don't think there's any specific ones that would be better than others. And obviously my diet in the UK is probably wildly different to your diet in the States as well. So I don't know, here it would be all broccoli and peas but yeah, maybe what the ones that actually, thinking about your lifestyle and your family, like where do you like to go and eat out, and what sort of things do they have on the menu, or what sort of things are available in your local markets or your local supermarkets that are affordable, that you would be nice if you could eat because they're widely available and easy for you to pick up. So I think it's just thinking about what your preferences are and what's available to you. I'm sorry, that's probably not what people want to hear.
That's kind of the same message I think we've shared all along, right? Like, what will work for you, where you are, what you have access to, what's available to you, and any tiny little efforts are valuable, right? Like, don't diminish any small little changes that you make. I loved in the chapter you mentioned, like, it literally just, in regards to how many servings a day, it was just like, just try your best, period. Like, I'm like, yes, it is that. Yes, just one little swap or one little change can really be
absolutely.
And I know in my house, I have 2 small children. I'm thinking about what will they actually eat. My 1-year-old will probably eat it, and it's fine. But like, just we'll try it. We'll try this week, and if it doesn't work, that's okay, right? Like there's nothing else.
And not panicking too much, particularly with young kids, if they're just not going through a phase where they're just having beige food and turning their nose up at all vegetables, and like just continuing to present them with them and not panicking, and and that kind of thing. It's just trying to keep low stress eating environments is really important.
That's a great suggestion. We could do a whole book club on just feeding little people.
Okay, yeah, you could. You could.
Little people. Someone said, I see you've met my 3.5-year-old. Yep.
Yeah, they're all the same.
My 4-year-old, my 1-year-old. I've seen it all. So, okay. Participants, do you have any additional questions? I have asked all the ones that have been submitted to me. Does anyone else have a burning additional question? Oh, we have a new one that just came in. Is there this one's a big one. Is there evidence that a body has a set point in weight?
So set point theory is popular. It's not a hard and fast proven theory. It's probably important to say that. I think people's set points and people's like what is normal will be different across people's kind of lifespans and things. I think it's a decent theory. but there's not any new evidence around it, if that makes sense. So what we know about set point theory is kind of hasn't been developed or pushed on in the last few years, as far as I'm aware. But I think it's a useful concept and a useful theory when you think about, most of this book is about food relationships, so it is about like, this is what we know about nutrition, and this is some of the hard nutrition science stuff sort of broken down and packaged up in a way that we can think about. But food relationships are a much bigger topic, and it's that set point theory fits very nicely into that. But
it talks about weight and metabolism in the book some, and that was not something that we actually had time to go into. But again, I want to encourage you. I mentioned this book has so many references in the back, like going back and looking at the calorie chapter, or the sections about weight, and looking at what references there are. And going back to the back of the book and like looking and seeing if you can find some additional information that could kind of point you in a direction to read or learn more as well. So those are there for you to use if you want to really learn more, dive in more. It's great. So, all right. Are there any final questions that we have for Helen? So we had someone submit in the Q&A. It's a comment, and we've had several people in the chat saying thank you for the book, how much they've enjoyed it. But I think this summarizes well how we all feel. And it just says, thank you so very much, Ms. West and Ms. Saunt, for such a beautiful, resourceful, informative book. I have type 2 diabetes, and I will be keeping this book on my bookshelf as an excellent resource ahead. And it's an asset for sure. So I just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you.
Yes. So thank you so much for your time. Feel free to stick around if you'd like. We're going to kind of wrap up the rest of our call here. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. All right. So thank you so much, Helen. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Now, I mentioned we're going to have Menti, and we're going to wrap up our final session together with a bit of engagement. So let's get plugged in quickly. This information is going to be placed in the chat, but it's also here as well. So if you're watching this on Zoom, on a computer, you could grab a tablet or a smartphone to participate, or you could just use your phone for Zoom and Menti. You can either scan the QR code, or you can type in www.menti.com and enter the code 17527326. And that's going to take you straight to this presentation. You can also open a second tab on your internet browser, and you could type that in as well. So menti.com 17527326. Now, if you can't submit answers on Menti, again, feel free to place those in the chat. Even if you can't submit answers at all, that's okay. I encourage you to kind of write this down maybe on a piece of paper just so that you can process. And if you're at a watch party, I know we've got several at different county extension offices. Feel free to share within your group as well, because I want you to have that opportunity to be engaged and share with those around you. All right, so www.menti.com 17527326. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to jump in. So this may look familiar to you because I actually asked you this at the very first session. Okay, so it should look familiar. When you hear the word nutrition, what is one word that comes to mind? Now, I want to provide you the chance to answer again, now that we have new knowledge and new perspective that you've gained during this experience together. Again, there's no right or wrong answer. What you submit is completely anonymous. No one knows what you're putting in. And it's a word cloud. So meaning the larger the word, the more frequently it is being submitted by those who are in the audience today. So we've got several in the chat. Thank you for sharing there. I was wondering if the largest word was going to be balance, and it looks like it. So we have food, balance, health, healthy eating, and it's going to be really interesting for me to go back and look at week 1 versus this week. And maybe that's something that I could share in the Facebook group, that we can kind of see the differences between the two. But we've got more words coming in. We've had 39 people who have submitted different words. We have nourishment, but really those words that are at the top seem to be health, food, and balance. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'll give you a few more seconds to submit. So more and more diversity, I like that one too. Variety, it's more than food. I like that. All right, well, thank you for submitting that. All right, so these should also look familiar because I asked you these at the beginning of week 1. So we have 3 statements here. I would like for you to answer all 3 statements. So don't just choose one, but answer all 3. So essentially, I want to see how much you agree with the following statement. From strongly disagree to strongly agree. 1, the first question, nutrition is important to me. 2, answering the question of how much you agree with I feel confident making food and nutrition choices. And 3, I feel confident knowing if nutrition information is fact or fiction. So I'm really hoping that over the last 4 weeks together, we have really moved the needle, right? Where you agree more with these statements. And it's okay if it doesn't. Maybe you need to read the book again. Maybe you really need to dive in a little bit more. Maybe you're hesitant about some of the ideas and concepts. That's okay. We all move at different spaces or at different paces. So here, how much do you agree with the following statements? Nutrition is important to me. I feel confident making food and nutrition choices. I feel confident knowing if nutrition information is fact or fiction. And someone said they definitely need to reread at a slower and more thorough pace. I think that's a great idea, right? Because we've kind of gone through the book in a flurry over the past month. So now that you have this experience and then you can go back, you could really probably look at the book with a fresh perspective. So we've had almost 50 people respond. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to be open and honest and reflective, right, about this experience that we've had together. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go on to our final question before we close out our time together. So what was most helpful to you about this book? This is an opportunity to give us a full answer. It's an open-ended question. So you can type in, take a little bit of time here to put in a response. Think about it. Maybe you need to think about this for a second. Maybe it's a specific chapter. Maybe it is a very specific topic or content. Thinking about this book in its entirety, from the intro to the closing thoughts, what was most helpful to you about this book? And I'll give you a few minutes here because I understand that this may take time for you to think about this question and then actually formulate what you're going to respond. All right, so we've got several that are coming in here. The wide variety of information, right? Because that kind of speaks to just the nature of nutrition and its complexity, right? There's so many different topics and chapters because there's so much to food and nutrition. How to look at the facts and fiction of nutrition and do my own research. How to maintain a more balanced diet, the wide variety of references, how food should be enjoyable. I love it. I love it. I love it. It helped me realize I don't need to limit myself. Balance and variety is key. Enjoying my foods. A lot of the myths that are presented. Hopefully you're actually able to kind of see the screen and read these as well. Debunking myths about food and nutrition, how health looks different for everyone. That is it's a great takeaway. That was a great takeaway. We've got several more if I keep scrolling. Oh my goodness, the references, the endorsements of intuitive eating, how to validate what I read, engage in learning more about food and nutrition without the focus being on health, diet culture and weight stigma. I was able to take something from each chapter and section. It was helpful and insightful. I don't know, this is literally the best part of these 4 weeks together. It's kind of really seeing your big takeaways and how beneficial this has been, how impactful it's been for you, how there's been true value in you investing the time and energy to reading this book and participating in these book club sections together. The importance of balance versus trends, looking at sources of information. Diet doesn't have to be all or nothing. Food giving us joy is so strong, incorporating more plants and variety. Thank you all so, so much for being open and honest, and truly sharing your personal experiences with us. It has been an absolute joy. We've had over 40 people. We still have answers coming in. Everything is impactful. A great resource. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. So here are just a couple closing thoughts. Feel free to go ahead, still submit things in the chat if you would like. There were 2 statements in the closing thoughts section. It's just a couple pages there at the very end. And I've pulled up, and I think these perfectly encapsulate the whole book that we've read together. So the first thing is that while the things you can eat have an impact on your health, which we know, there's no doubt there, food is so much more than a collection of nutrients or a vehicle through which to achieve healthy. And you guys have already hit on that with what you're taking away from the book, right? Like food being enjoyable and all the different purposes that food can have within our lives, how much food and nutrition is kind of centered in our identity and our culture, and respecting that and moving forward in a way that respects that as well. The second quote that I really want to point out, and I think you all are taking this away. I saw it a couple times submitted. Closing thought, finally, and probably most importantly, we want to stress that there's really no such thing as a perfect diet, that we are all our own individuals, and how we define nutrition, how we achieve nutrition could look very different than the person beside you. And that is an okay thing. That is a good thing, right? That's what allows nuance and space in nutrition for us to really create it, what it is for us, that's unique for us, that meets our needs, that leaves us satisfied, and nourished, right? Those are the overall goals. Oh, it is okay to love food. It is great to love food. It is great to love food. I see that in the chat. All right, so this is my final slide, you all. So before we close out, I do want to read one final passage from the book. It's on page 248, so if you have it with you. And I think it's a great way to end the book and a great way for us to end our time together. We encourage you to find what works for you, to eat your veggies, move your body in a way that brings you joy, include foods you love in your diet, and most of all, to have fun. You've got this. All right. I hope you take that to heart and even consider sharing that message with someone that you know or someone that you love, so that we can kind of push this idea, this fresh idea about food and nutrition forward. Now, I would absolutely love to hear from you as we evaluate this experience. We are Extension. You're probably laughing if you attend Extension programs. We are always evaluating and reporting here, but this will really help us inform future book clubs and events that we do. If you could take, I'm going to say 3 minutes to complete this survey. The link to the survey has been placed in the chat. We also have a QR code here that you could scan that directly takes you to that survey as well. We will also send this out in the follow-up email that'll go out tomorrow so that you can participate. But I would love for you to just take a couple minutes and give me some feedback on your experience and the time that we've been able to spend together. Again, I want to say a very huge special thank you one more time to Helen West for joining us today, sharing about herself, opening up to us, having fun, and playing along and being open to us using this book for our book club. It has been a true pleasure to read your work. We do have our fingers crossed for book 2 and even additional resources that may come out that kind of build off of this book as well. We are all ears over here at this UK and different from your UK. And finally, it has been a true pleasure spending time with you. I wholeheartedly mean that. Thank you for reading along with me. I hope you found one piece of information that will stick with you. So I just want to say thank you, and I hope everybody has the best weekend available to them. And please complete the survey. Thank you, everybody.